Thousands of armed Russian troops, wearing camouflage uniforms without insignia, have taken control of Crimea, according to Reuters. Ukraine's new interior minister has called it an armed invasion and occupation. Russia denies its troops have seized Crimea, but Moscow did denounce the recent change in Ukraine's government as an armed mutiny and insurgency. Former Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych absconded to Russia in late February. He reportedly fled first to Sevastopol, located on Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula and home to a Russian naval base and thousands of Russian sailors. Before the former president left, I traveled about 600 miles south of the capital by train to visit Sevastopol. There I approached people on the city's main boardwalk and found people were angered by the Euromaidan protests in Kiev. They think the activists there are criminals. Sevastopol student Philippe told me the protesters are brainless vandals, set to do nothing more than engage in destruction.
Но такие радикалы, как УНАУНСО, вот эти все нацисты, националисты украинские, они, в принципе, пришли на Майдан только, я думаю, для того, чтобы разрушить все. Потому что они не придерживаются никакой больше политики. И мне кажется, что они нацисты не украинские, а европейские, потому что они рвутся в Европу.
Like most of the people I spoke to in Crimea, Philippe was opposed to closer ties with Europe. He asked to be identified only by his first name so he could speak freely about these sensitive political issues. Closer integration with Europe is forced, he told me.
Это тем, что жители востока Украины и Севастополя не поддерживают происходящие в Киеве протесты. Интеграцию с Евросоюзом как отказ от евроинтеграции с Российской Федерацией, что для нас экономически невыгодно.
Many people here identify closely with Russia.
Мы граждане Украины, русской национальности. У нас в паспорте нет графы национальность. Я вам могу показать свой паспорт.
Indeed, about 1 million ethnic Russians live in Crimea, where Russian is nearly universally spoken, and where only 4 of 600 schools teach in Ukrainian. Russia is reportedly handing out Russian passports, which happened in Georgia prior to the 2008 war there. In 2010, Russia signed a deal with Ukraine that extends the lease on Russia's Black Sea Fleet in Crimea until 2042. An ex-commander of the fleet said the Russian Navy will stay in Sevastopol forever. A Ukrainian sailor, Andrei, told me he doesn't see Russia as a threat. The 22-year-old from Lugansk, near the Russian border, occasionally trains with the Russian naval forces. He wouldn't speak on camera, since he didn't have permission from his command.
Если будет украинский и российский флот, вот как мы, например, проводим учения вместе, то это огромная сила, и даже Европа не справится с этим. В таком.
Andrei told me that when the Euromaidan protests started, the Ukrainian Navy was put on a higher state of alert because they were afraid the protesters might attack them. Yet, even in Sevastopol, there was a small Euromaidan movement, at least when I was there. Starting late last year, about 100 activists protested in this city of about 350,000. The demonstrations were scaled back in part because of pro-Russian provocateurs who would disrupt the demonstrations in this critical port city.
We have no democracy here like the US citizens have democracy into the US, and European citizens have the democracy into the European Union because we have real democratic law, democratic standards in law, but this law is not working because the power representatives, they're just ignoring the law.
Back in Kiev, a Euromaidan representative says Yanukovych's political party waged an information war, putting out propaganda describing Euromaidan as wrong and destructive for the country itself. A Russia Today reporter quit on air last week over the network's coverage of the events in Ukraine. But there are armed militias at Euromaidan. About 12,000 volunteers make up a self-defense force at the square, patrolling the occupied areas and guarding all entranceways. Most have clubs or bats, while some have military uniforms, shields, even body armor.
It is necessary because what the government shows to us continuously, and it's its willingness to attack the people indiscriminately to achieve total control over the country. And that is what we want to avoid by creating a militia which can defend effectively the Maidan and the people here.
The Euromaidan protest was initially sparked late last year when Yanukovych backtracked on a trade deal with the European Union. But following a crackdown in December on protests that left 5 activists dead, the focus shifted to pressing domestic issues.
More and more people actually understand that this Maidan is not just about is not an anti-Russian project, and it's more about the things like corruption, rule of law, democracy, and so on.
Violent clashes between the riot police and the protesters in February left at least 70 people dead, mostly protesters, police, and at least one journalist.
Саме себе викрадаємо тут на Майдані, саме прибиваємо себе гвоздями, одрізаємо вуха і потім показуємо, що це знущається влада. Хоч насправді нормальна людина це не може навіть сказати, не то, що подумати. То понятно, що страшно, ну жити так неможливо.
We call it in Ukraine revolution of dignity, but it's kind of an awakening of consciousness, national consciousness in many ways, but also kind of human dignity. Is people are stepping out and saying, I have a right to do things.
Cymbaluk has been coming to the Euromaidan since November 2013. Back in the U.S., some academics and columnists have claimed the protests in Kiev were controlled by right-wing extremists who are anti-Semitic, homophobic, and racist, and that they're helped by the EU and the American government.
We have, in the case of Ukraine, a democratically elected leader, Yanukovych, who was overthrown by a coup d'etat that was spearheaded by neo-Nazi militias after he'd agreed to move up the elections so people could even vote him out of office if they wished. That led to his being forced to flee, and sort of rump parliament began to pass a bunch of laws while some of these neo-Nazi militias controlled the government buildings.
But during my time reporting on the ground at Euromaidan, I found that the far-right nationalists represented a minority. At a 30,000-strong protest in February, Cymbaluk said she's met people at the protests from all walks of life, Russian and Ukrainian speakers, young and old people of different faiths and political parties. The people come from all parts of the country.
I mean, I never really felt such a great belonging to nation or to movements, but here really is probably the most perfect community I've ever experienced, and this really have been the most beautiful times in my life. You just really feel people care.
While some claim the protesters are extremists, I found many activists at Euromaidan were simply looking for change in their government. That change has come with Yanukovych fleeing the country and new elections slated for May. Russia, meanwhile, has called Yanukovych's departure a classic coup d'etat and seized Crimea to protect Ukrainian and Russian citizens. The Crimean parliament voted to join the Russian Federation with a referendum on the issue slated for mid-March. For the Real News Network, I'm Zach Badorf.